I call this meeting to order at 7:02. Just want to start off by saying that it is finals week. So, we obviously do have to get through appointments and a few really important things, but, let's definitely keep the conversation moving along, and please all council members be actively participating so that, we don't have a repeat of last week. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
Can you scrap the SWC programming fund?
I think for special meetings, we don't have to do funding. Yeah. So I don't need to strike that.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so we could go ahead and move into approval of the minutes for last week. I believe last week was June 1st. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong.
That is correct, June 1st.
Awesome. Can I get a motion, please?
I motion to approve the meeting minutes from the meeting of June 1st.
A second?
I second.
Awesome. Promise motions are Munn seconds. All in favor, please raise your hands. Awesome. So by a vote of 12-0, the motion passes. 13-0, the motion passes, and the minutes for last week's meeting are approved. Okay, great. Moving straight into public comment.
Hey, Breeze.
Yes.
I'm sorry, you do have to vote in the agenda as is before we go to public comment.
Okay, awesome. So can I have an approval of the agenda for this week, June 8th?
Can someone send it in the chat? Sorry.
Oh, one quick thing.
Yes, Patty, sorry.
Sorry. Usually we'll add the appointments names on the agenda as well. So if you have that information, you may want to add that in.
Okay, we'll go ahead and do that. Thank you.
Breeze, can you send me who, or tell me who specifically we are?
Yes. So we will be moving forth with Woodia and Megan.
Okay, for sure. I'm just going to look up their last name.
Are we allowed to motion while the changes are being made?
You can, as long as they're added and it's reflected that the motion reflects the added changes. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Promise, for asking that.
Okay.
Great.
I was just going to say I move to approve the agenda for this meeting with the just the addition of the last names of the or the names of the appointees for board of directors.
Awesome. Okay, Promise motions. Can I get a second?
I second.
Promise motions, Jay seconds. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. By a vote of 13-0, the motion passes and the agenda is approved. Okay, now I believe we're done with all of that, so we can move straight into public comment. Public comment is a time for anyone from the public to come forth and have 2 minutes to speak. We will be limiting it to 30 minutes unless it seems that it requires more attention. Want to remind everyone to challenge ideas, not individuals. Use gender inclusive and respectful language. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom from accountability. And each speaker will be given 2 minutes to speak and the opportunity to speak once. Awesome. Okay. And if you are in the public and would like to comment, please raise your hand at this moment and we will be promoting you. Thank you. And once you're in the room, please go ahead and raise your hand. That way we can call on you, please. Okay, awesome. Hi, Lauren. You can go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to start off with saying that invisible disabilities are still disabilities, and disabled students should not be begging for accommodations that we are legally entitled to and protected for under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And, you know, these students getting this accommodation literally decides whether or not we are successful in our classes, because that is just the scope of it. Disabled students are more likely to drop out. And I'm tired of public commenting. I've had to public comment for transfer housing. I shouldn't have to be begging this school to treat me like a fair individual. And it is just really upsetting how ableist, inaccessible, and how I've had just such a horrible time at UCLA. And it's just not acceptable. They can't just treat students from these communities like little diversity tokens and then toss us to the side and ignore us, but prop us up when they need to show like, oh yeah, we're diverse, we care about people at UCLA. No, that is not okay. This is a gross act. The way it was done on Friday, where we couldn't comment on Monday. And I just think that it goes to show that this school does not care about disabled people at all. And honestly, I'm ashamed to be a student here and be associated with such an ableist institution that picks and chooses who it's gonna prop up, because this is not a school for all. No, this is a school for who we're gonna prioritize. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair. And I don't think that is aligned with true Bruin values.
Thank you, Lauren. I want to remind everyone, as you are promoted, please raise your hand so I can call on you. I believe it's Dej.
Yeah, Dej. I wanted to piggyback off of what the last woman said. I'm sorry, I had her name, but you know how Zoom like rearranges the faces. So I'm sorry. I think the thing that upset me the most was the fact, like the date that it was done. And part of me naively is saying like, oh, you know, they just, I don't know, it so happened to be like that. But even if they wanted to do it, I think it would have been way more respectful for them to do it a different quarter so we could have had this time. The fact that they did it the Friday before, I just found it really disrespectful. And I just don't understand why that happened or how that happened. So I was wondering if you all ever got an answer about that, like why that is.
Are you asking us? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys knew, like, because this is the first time I've ever been to, I guess, a meeting like this. So I was just wondering if you guys found out, like, is this the normal procedure? And like, if not, you know, who's kind of responsible for this and stuff? Like it's just that part of um the timing and stuff like that. I just was really put off by that.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
No, yeah. We as a council, we're not aware. I will say that, you know, we find out stuff usually around the same time that all students do. On some issues, maybe we find out a bit earlier, but at this time we were not aware. And I know that us as a council have tried to mobilize as much as possible, but you're welcome to stay right now as well, because we do have administrators here who will be answering some of the questions and concerns students have.
Yeah, that was actually why I wanted to come, is because I thought, I don't know, I just thought that like they talked to you or what, like what is our representation during those decisions? Like, do we have any? Because I think you all sent an email, or maybe it was on Instagram, of like saying that basically the people who work at the CAE overwhelmingly are like upset about this. So I was just wondering, like, what was our representation too when this was being decided? Did we have any?
Hey, Breeze, I'm going to jump in here. I just want to remind everyone that so public comment is just a time to make people's voices heard. I want you to know that we will be having full discussion. We have CAE representation as well as Dean of Students here, but to respect the integrity of the meeting, public comment just gives everyone the opportunity to speak, and then the council can invite you to ask additional questions later in the agenda, if that's okay. So I'm not silencing you. I just want to let you know that we actually have representation here, and they're here to answer your questions. But we're just going to do that at a different part of the meeting. Is that fair?
No, that's totally okay. I've never like been to one of these meetings.
No, it's totally okay. So hold on to your questions. I
Thank you.
see Dean Blandisi writing them down, so they will get answered. Just stick with us just for a few more minutes.
You got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Tessa? Tessa, we can't really hear you. I'm sorry.
Now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm really upset about this. I'm shocked at the lack of transparency and the lack of notice. From my understanding, this decision was made almost a year ago, and to not have told students that, for me personally, I took the last 2 quarters off for obvious reasons. And if I had known like that this was going to happen, I would have probably taken classes those quarters. So this like upsets my academic plan a lot. It will change going forward. I was planning on double majoring. I don't know if that'll be possible now. And like the previous commenters said, this like hurts retention of disabled students, and it's a really shocking move. But I want to add that disabled students don't just deserve to have access to UCLA. We should be able to thrive and make connections and not have these barriers to education. And although a 15-unit cap is probably doable for a lot of people, like I know for me personally, it's going to hurt my health. It's going to make me choose between like my academic schedule and like succeeding and having health impacts. And I have gone through so many cycles at this school of doing a few quarters and then having to take time off because it just has such devastating impacts on my health. And this move is like going to make that worse for sure. And I'm so tired of having to fight these same battles and feeling like I'm not heard or listened to or respected at all. Like, where is our seat at the table? We're the ones who understand this. We're the ones who live this. We're the ones who this is impacting. Why don't we have a say?
Thank you so much, Tessa. Would anyone else like to give public comment? Seeing as there is no more public comment, we will close public comment at 7:15 p.m.
Actually, Grace, there are a few like written public comment that Jane and I will be reading, and then we also have a video to share that was submitted for public comment, if that's okay.
That's perfectly fine.
Oh, there's also one other attendee whose hand is up as well.
Okay, I will promote them.
Let's have them speak first once they are promoted.
Hello. I would just like to say one thing that I found particularly upsetting about the email was the way that it was worded, where it said it was to prevent priority enrollment from having an impact on availability for other students not receiving priority enrollment. And I feel like what's really difficult about that statement is that it creates this sense of, by trying to level the playing field for disabled students, you're harming the other students. And I mean, first of all, I would like to know how many disabled students in general are utilizing the full 19 units. First of all, disabled students that have priority enrollment, because not all of them may have priority enrollment. And then out of them, how many are even using the 19 units? Because I don't feel personally that it would be enough to threaten the level of enrollment for other students. Whereas for us, you know, it's like make or break. It's extremely important. I know that for my major, and this is not even considering a minor, this is just to, you know, graduate in 4 years, that I have to take 4 classes every quarter for the rest of my 4 years here, except for 1 quarter. And you know, I have so many things going on with my disabilities that the priority enrollment is really important. You know, it helps with scheduling the tests, the double time. That's something that other students don't have to worry about. You know, a 3-hour test is like 6 hours for me, and that's going to overlap with. I mean, basically, I can't have 2 finals on the same day, not like other students. And so that's really important when you're taking 4 classes, because that's 4 days out of the 5 days that finals week is. And I can't be having that overlap. And then if I'm forced to not take 4 classes, I'm not on track to graduate in time. My family pays over $50,000 a year in medical bills, and I have a Cal grant. If my Cal grant is jeopardized by going over the 4-year limit, that's unacceptable. My family should not be having to take out money, and I should not be having to take out money, because this is, I feel like it's a simple thing. I just don't feel like there are enough disabled students using 19 units to throw off the enrollment for the entire school, the entire population.
Thank you so much.
Second that.
Okay. Cass, you can go ahead and read public comment, please.
Okay, this is the first, or actually I'm going to send again the document in the chat that's filled with the written public comment that was submitted today. The first public comment submitted says, we all know CAE reduced units from 19 to 15 in an attempt to be equitable to those with priority. With the unit reduction, CAE students are capped at 15 units regardless of the pass number. Regent scholars also had priority enrollment reduced from 13 units to 10 units. However, they will be able to enroll in all 19 units under their first pass. CAE students are now getting less units than the Regents group. Even CAE students in Regents are staying capped at 15. What kind of treatment is this? Furthermore, if UCLA is letting Regents enroll in all 19 units under the first pass, how is it equitable to those without priority? The classes will now be full before second pass even opens. And this second public comment submitted was by Rowan O'Brien. It says priority enrollment for 19 units is a necessity for me because of my disabilities. I cannot risk any chance of not getting into a class that fits into my medical schedule. I have constant doctor appointments as well as hour-long medical treatments to do in the morning every day. This makes it almost impossible to go to class in the morning, and I need priority enrollment to ensure I get into afternoon and/or evening classes. I have to repeat these same medical treatments at night at specific hours, so I can't just fall asleep early. Schedule of doctor appointments is not up to me. Doctors work in the morning. I can't work around that. I also rely on Bruin Access to take me to and from classes. The van only goes to campus on the hour, which is very inconvenient and means I need to make sure my classes are at very specific times. I am basically stranded on campus with no way to charge my oxygen tank or move up hills or stairs in between classes. The battery on my oxygen tank only can last a few hours without dying and putting me in a state of emergency. I need to make sure I am enrolled in classes that give me enough time to charge my oxygen concentrator, rest because I have limited energy, do medical treatments, and go to doctor's appointments. And then Jane will be reading the rest.
Yes, so the next one is, my name is Athya Uthaye Kumar, and I'm a third-year computer science major. I'm writing to express my disappointment with the changes to disabled student priority enrollment. This sudden change from 19 to 21 units to 15 units would affect disabled students' ability to enroll in accessible classes and access the classes they need to graduate on time. I support the Disabled Student Union's condemnation of the change and ask that the administration USAC be more considerate of the input of disabled student leaders when meeting, and then it cuts off there. And then the next one is from an anonymous student that says, this priority enrollment issue is the tip of the iceberg. UCLA needs an investigation into not only the lack of help for students with disabilities, but how far the pendulum has swung in the direction of harming disabled students' access to education. UCLA needs to fire the CAE director who is responsible for the failure to notify students for months during her time as director. This is one of the most mismanaged debacles in recent UCLA history and completely limits, access to education for disabled students. You have opened yourself up for an 1,000+ student class action lawsuit. Everyone involved in this decision needs to advocate as hard as possible to reverse it.
And will we be playing the video, sorry?
Yeah, I can share my screen actually. Let me know in the chat if you guys can hear it.
Hello, Council. My name is Quinn O'Connor, and I don't think I have formally introduced myself to the new 2021-2022 Council yet, so welcome. I am here to comment on the CAE Academic Senate hearing happening later on tonight. I am grateful that this is finally happening. This is kind of unscripted. I have had quite the busy week because obviously all of these events have transpired during week 9 to 10 to now we are in finals week, and it has been exhausting to say the least. As a disabled student leader, constantly being forced to advocate and using my free labor and time personally since June of 2020, I have been in meetings with CAE and student affairs leadership on disabled student issues and hopeful partnerships that never actually came to fruitfulness because of this constant lack of transparency on student affairs and CAE's part. But besides that, I am extremely, extremely frustrated by the events that have continued to transpire over the years, even before I started advocating on behalf of disabled students. But I just think it is incredibly disrespectful of student affairs and UCLA administration to take advantage of disabled students' time. And they continue to do so. And I hope that this is a turning point because of the events that have transpired, especially in the past couple weeks. The Disabled Student Union has finally decided to take more of a stand. And because of that, we have, as you probably all know, we have, for this specific issue, we have been able to amass over 800 signatures, 832 signatures to be exact, from the UCLA community, undergrad, graduates, staff, lecturers, the general public as well. And I think that that more than anything should show you all that this is an issue that honestly is literally breaking the law. And the CAE has broken the law in the past. They have had lawsuits against them in the past that have, been settled, and they're not super out in the open because obviously UCLA and UCLA Legal loves to cover things up as much as possible to save face. But, I think that in order to actually make change, we need to have government officials involved. We need to have legal entities involved, because nobody's going to make the change, and UCLA isn't going to be forced to do anything unless they are legally entitled to. And that is a sad realization that I've come to over the past year of trying to advocate for students, and knowing that nothing changed at all, and they continue to disrespect us and disrespect our time and my time personally. If I got paid minimum wage to be in all the meetings and exert all the energy that I have on the specific issue, I would be very set as a college student. And I think that, I know that you all will probably hear a lot of the context later on tonight and from other public comments. So I just wanted to use my public comment to personally just express my frustration, but also at the same time hope for actual tangible change. Finally, a year coming, honestly, years before me as well, but in my case, a year that I have fought for this. And I think that it is such a shame that it had to come to this point, and I tried not to get it to this point. I remember being in multiple meetings telling Dean Blandisi and telling Dr. Katie that I wanted to work with them, and that because of the positions that they are in as admin, they can't really take as much of a stand, but they needed to tell us so that the Disabled Student Union could work for them and advocate for the students and help them advocate. And here we are. And so I would like to personally, I know that Dean Blandisi's leaving, which congratulations, I guess you get to not be held as accountable as you honestly probably should be for wasting my time for a year. But I call on Dr. Katie to take a stand and advocate and stand with the Disabled Student Union, stand with the students that you are supposed to serve in your capacity as the Center for Accessible Education Director. I think that we can make this change that we need to make if you can stand with us and advocate for the reversal of this decision and start clean and start on a clean slate where we can work together as students and staff to make UCLA a more accessible space and make UCLA legally accommodating at the very bare minimum. Thank you.
Great. Is there any other public comment? Going once, going twice. Seeing as there is no more public comment, we will be closing this public comment off at 7:28 p.m. Moving on to special presentations. And this is where we will have the CAE Senate discussion. Jane, you have the floor.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Dean Blandisi and Dr. Ketty and Dr. Galvan for being here. So I'm first going to kind of like give everyone who might not know a background of the situation that we're currently talking about, and then everyone on council to like discuss this and talk about moving forward. So as an overview for the situation, I believe in May 2020, a decision was made by the Undergraduate Council of the Academic Senate to reduce the amount of units that students with CAE accommodations get during priority enrollment from like 19 or 21, depending on their school, to 15 units. And this decision was made based on a recommendation from the Priority Enrollment Ad Hoc Committee, who was then who made the decision in like collaboration with the CAE and the ADA 504 compliance officer. And then disabled students were not informed of this decision until Friday, like I think May 31st or like 27th or something. So a Friday in 2021, and priority enrollment is May 28th. Thank you, Tessa. And then priority enrollment also starts like June 14th and the 15th. So there was very little communication in between then, and there was like an 11-month period where no communication was made. And since then, the Disabled Student Union has drafted a letter and a petition that community stakeholders have signed in opposition to this decision that currently has more than 850 signatures. And today we have Maria Blandisi and Adriana Galvan and Norma Ketty here, so we can all discuss and ask them questions and talk about this decision. And I will pass it off to Angie quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. So yeah, we wanted to turn it over to Norma, Maria, and Adriana to kind of walk us through the process of the decision from their administrative standpoint and talk us through like how and why the Priority Enrollment Ad Hoc Committee came to the decision and why disabled students weren't included in the decision-making process, since this policy does affect them directly and they are a really huge stakeholder in this, as you saw during public comment and in the over 12 pages of student testimony. So yeah, just giving over the floor to whoever wants to start.
I can start us out. First, let me introduce myself because I haven't met everyone in the Zoom. So my name is Maria Blandisi, and I'm currently the Dean of Students. And I appreciate, Jane, the outreach and the invitation to come into this space to engage in discussion. And in thinking about who was best poised to talk through the background, I asked Dean Galvan, as well as the chair of the Undergraduate Academic Council, Megan McAvoy, who wrote to the community expressing concern, to think about how best to engage in the conversation with you all. And obviously, Dr. Norma Ketty, the director of the Center for Accessible Education, is with us as well. So I think at this point, I know there are a number of questions, and Jane, I appreciate the baseline that you offered us. I think it would be helpful to hear from Dean Galvan initially as to the background to how we got to this point, and then we can engage in conversation. So Dean Galvan, would it make sense to turn to you?
That sounds good. Thank you, Dean Galandisi. And thank you all for inviting us here today. So I'll give a little bit of background. I was the chair of the Priority Enrollment Ad Hoc Committee when I was a member of the Undergraduate Council. And this committee was commissioned or charged by the then chair of the Undergraduate Council, Robert Gould, because in discussions with academic senate faculty, there was question about how priority enrollment was allocated to different groups on campus, why there was a lack of uniformity in the number of units that were allocated to each of the groups, and whether or not the priority enrollment was achieving its intended mission that was established back in 1990. So as some background, priority enrollment and the allocations have been reviewed every about 10 years or so. The last time this was reviewed was in 2009, and at that point there was a massive reduction in the number of students who received priority enrollment, because at that time about 33% of students on UCLA's campus were receiving priority enrollment. And that, of course, had the unintended consequence of making the entire process less valuable for all the students, because 33% were receiving priority enrollment. So the committee was charged. We were charged in January 2019. We met for about a year and a half at bi-monthly meetings, and we reviewed data on the number of students receiving priority enrollment, the number of units, the number of units that were used for priority enrollment. The average is 13 units that are used for priority enrollment by week 3. Initially, it's 15 units, that the number that is used. And we consulted with various stakeholders. So I think one of the previous comments was about this decision being made in collaboration with CAE, and I want to say that that's actually not the case. We invited CAE to one of our meetings, and they described some of the questions. They answered some of the questions we had about the number of students who are receiving priority enrollment, who are registered with CAE, the reasons why it was necessary, et cetera. We also reviewed in the committee proposals from other student groups who asked to receive priority enrollment. And so those were the bases of the decision. I'm happy to go into more detail if it's of interest. And so in June 9th, 2020, we made the recommendations to the Undergraduate Council, at which point it was approved by the council. And I will say that there were several questions about representation from students. There was a USAC representative. And the reason that occurred is because whenever an ad hoc committee is charged on the Undergraduate Council, the USAC members who are present are invited to participate and serve on the committee. And I should say that any USAC determines who is represented at Undergraduate Council. So I encourage students who are with any group, if there's interest, to reach out to the representatives to be represented on the Undergraduate Council. So I think I've talked too much, but maybe that's a background.
Yes, thank you for that, Dean Galvan. And I will say this, right, like that representative, they've already graduated at this point, right? Or they're about to graduate. So I think when we're making decisions like this, like I respect you, and I know that we've worked together in the space this past year, but I just don't think it's right. Also, that student might have not fully been present. the decision should have been distributed to more students. And, you know, I didn't receive this information when I came into the position in September, right? So that I could have had more context and could have told student leaders that I appointed, this is what we're going to be tackling this year. And I really would have appreciated that, you know, that transparency on my end, and really with like the entire council and the entire student body. So I do want to say that I don't think it's right to like frame it on like specific students, because it's, you know, we're really supposed to be uniting as one front. And you know, that student, I don't know who was present that day, but yeah, that's just my end of it. So I will popcorn over to Angie.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out that the student reps that sit on undergraduate council can't necessarily represent the wide range of like needs and experiences of every single community on campus, like the disabled student community. So they rely heavily on recommendations from departments like the CAE, who are supposed to advocate and represent and really like take a stance to fight for the well-being and the rights that disabled students are entitled to. So whoever the student rep was might have voted because they had trusted the recommendations from the CAE to do what was in the best interests, or from council to do what was in the best interests of disabled students. So yeah, just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Jane, sorry.
Yes, I wanted to just ask to clarify specifically. So you
Mhm.
mentioned that CAE was at a meeting, but they weren't a part of the decision-making process. Is there a reason that CAE wasn't more a part of the decision-making process? And at what point was the ADA 504 office like contacted?
Yeah, good question. So that person was at the same meeting as CAE leadership. It was in the spring of 2020. And the reason that CAE was not a part of the decision is because we were making the decision across different populations at UCLA. And so none of those other populations were represented on the ad hoc committee either.
I think it might be helpful.
Tom?
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
can I come in?
Yeah, you can. Sorry, Dean Blind Easy. Yeah.
No, that's okay. So, Adrienne, I think it might be also helpful in terms of shared governance and how important it is that the undergraduate council of the academic senate is charged with thinking through a litany of issues that impact the student experience at the undergraduate level. And so when decisions are made, it's not just by one group or one individual set of people. So it wouldn't be just the CAE making a decision, or it wouldn't just be the undergraduate academic senate committee making a decision. It also goes to the full academic senate for endorsement and review. Adriana, is that a fair way to frame just the multiple constituent bases that get consulted and thought about while decisions are being made?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I should explain. So the recommendations that the committee made were then forwarded to the undergraduate council, and then the undergraduate council discusses it at their subsequent meeting, and then all the members of the undergraduate council review it for 2 weeks, and then have a discussion and then vote.
And I hear the feedback, Breeze, about you know, sitting as a member of the undergrad council, right? Because I sit as a standing guest to that space, right? And so there was a student on the ad hoc committee, Adriana, if I have that right, and then there are 4 representatives of students sitting on the broader undergraduate council. But I hear also feedback about being onboarded and being how to understand what issues are being tackled by the committee in that coming year, and how do we support the learning associated with understanding the impact of these decisions, rather than just going through the motions of showing up in a space but not really understanding the consequences and the impact of decisions. So I make a note to think about how I can engage with there is a team of people at the academic senate that aren't faculty that support the faculty in the management of these conversations. So how can we also think about how that academic senate staff assist the onboarding and training, if you will, of student representatives? So I hear that as part of the feedback that I think is very fair that we can absorb and think about how to channel. Adriana, am I making sense, or And that,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the continuity is what I'm hearing from what you're saying, that the continuity of the issues, similar to how there's continuity in the undergraduate council, because as some members rotate off, others stay on. So they are familiar with the issues that occurred the previous year. Mhm.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think, another point, and I think it's something that I've honestly been tired out when I was AAC was, consistently having to bring in student groups to advocate on different issues, right? And like I always had to voice that, like I can't be the sole like speaker for a lot of student groups. I think that's like an issue as a whole with academic senate. And I know academic senate can only make recommendations. I counter that time and time again last year, but I definitely think like that transparency was definitely needed. Not pinning it on one student either. I don't think it's very respectful, but I will popcorn over to Promise because I saw her hand was up.
Yeah, I have a few questions, but like the first one that I want to start with is like essentially kind of like what was the impetus for reducing the amount of priority enrollment in the first place? And because I understand like the goal of priority enrollment, and I believe you said like 30% of students are receiving priority enrollment. Was the fact that there were 30% of students receiving priority enrollment creating a huge issue for the other 70% of students to enroll in classes? And what was there an equity issue that was occurring because of that as well? And like, are those what were the reasons that catalyzed like wanting to like change this besides just reducing access? I think that's my first question.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be more clear. So what I mentioned is that in 2009, 33% of students were receiving priority enrollment. And at that point, there was a major reduction in removing priority enrollment from various groups. For example, at one point, I think student tour leaders received it, students on the newspaper received it, and so that's what happened at that time. The current revision and examination of priority enrollment was motivated by the look at the data showing that there was a trend towards an uptick in the number of students and units that were granted through priority enrollment. And so this was an attempt to determine how we can ensure that 10% of the population receives priority enrollment so that we do not reach again that 33% level.
Okay.
Prom, okay, sorry, go.
No, yeah, I have more questions, but I'm not sure if like Jane's question should come next first.
It's up to you guys. I don't know if someone wants to go first. Jane, do you mind waiting or do you want to ask a question?
No, I can wait. Prom, you can go.
Okay. Yeah, I guess like my next question is like in doing this to essentially kind of like find a way to make the keep the numbers low so that as the years go on, it doesn't rise to a 30 something percent or so. Like my confusion comes from like why like specifically the students with disabilities were even like that specific subset of people whose priority enrollment is like granted based on like having access to equitable education, like why their units were even considered being reduced when like that in my opinion should have not even been considered, and things should have been taken from elsewhere, because specifically here it's due to having access to like equitable education. So I'm like trying to I'm trying to understand like why that was looked at. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So there were a few reasons. One is that the students who received priority enrollment through CAE received the most units of priority enrollment, and throughout the history of priority enrollment, this is the highest max that has ever been granted. Also because the number of students that represent those who receive priority enrollment is highest with students who receive priority enrollment through CAE. And the final reason is that when we looked at the data, we looked at how the number of units that are enrolled through priority enrollment across all groups. And 15 is what was the average for all students, including those in CAE.
Yeah, and oh, sorry.
No, go on, Prom. Sorry.
Okay, I was gonna like ask this next question and let the next person ask. So I'm like looking at the essentially like what the decision was, and it says that the line that references the CAE was reduce the priority enrollment units for students registered with the CAE, like from 21, 20, and 19 units to 15 units uniformly. So like the next question is like, was there ever the thought to essentially make it a sliding scale so that a group like this population of students who are registered with the CAE are not a monolith, especially when it comes to disability. So 15 units might work for some students with disabilities, but for others, that, as we heard during public comment, is the difference between like being able to afford to continue going here to graduate on time, and like putting their health at risk, their lives at risk. So like knowing that, and also just from like the student input that has come, like what are things that, like, is there any way for there to be change in that so that it's not uniform for this student population? And are there discussions that are happening to make that change, so that like students who, like with disabilities aren't like stuck with this uniformity that doesn't, like, in this group that is meant, like the set of people who are able to get priority enrollment, the students with disabilities are probably the most diverse of needs, because like due to their priority enrollment. So like that's like my next question, like what is being done, because like this can't happen, I think, and that's something that I hope is becoming more and more evident. Like it just genuinely cannot happen, especially because it's not legal. So yeah, I would like to kind of hear a bit more about that.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on that. So this dovetails with a question actually that one of the students had, I think it was Tadeo, when he asked whether how many students actually use the full max of 19, 20, and 21, and that's an excellent question. And it's the case that not all students, as I mentioned a moment ago, the average is 15 units that are used for priority enrollment in students who receive it through CAE. And so this conversation that we're having now, or the conversations that have led up to this, have led to us internally discussing the opportunity of perhaps having an exemption or exception appeal process, so that certain students, as we heard today and as you noted, may need it for reasons that vary as varied as all of you are. So that's a conversation that we're having, and I think it's a really good answer, I think, to what you're raising.
I appreciate the question, and I also don't want to rush to thinking about the solutions until we have the opportunity to kind of fully vet all the questions. So, but Promise, you were leading us into thinking about what's next and where do we go and how do we address the concerns that have come forward. So when we're ready for that conversation, then we want to make sure that we stay in conversation, and today in this evening's conversation we get there, but we don't want to cut short making sure that we answer the questions. So Norma hasn't been able to, offer up some of the thoughts related to next steps. But when we get to that part of the conversation, I think that will be helpful, related to exceptions for students that need that level of support, and also answering the other questions that remain.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dean Landisi and Dean Galvan. I do see that someone asked a question and then I saw Jane's hand, so I'll go in the order I saw hands come up. Um, I do have a question, a couple actually, another one just came up. One student asked, I have a question. Since the decision was made in 2020, were people notified until May 2021?
I think that's a very fair question to be asked. And what I will offer is that I was the interim director of the Center for Accessible Education during this time period. No, was I? No, not even. Yes, I was, right? I'm trying to remember timing wise. So I was the dean of students as well as the interim director because we needed to search for a director, but we also the university was in a hiring freeze because of COVID. So while we were trying to adjust to the realities of remote instruction, and I was charged with trying to understand and manage the Center for Accessible Education, I was informed of the Academic Senate, the Undergraduate Council's decision, as Adriana previously mentioned, on June 9th, 2020. And we were in the process of trying to advocate for the hiring of the director position, which when we were able to do that summer and then conclude that search later in the fall. So it was on me to communicate to the community, and that did not occur while I was the interim director. So from an accountability perspective, I heard Dej also ask who is responsible. From a communication standpoint, that should have been me, that I communicated more actively with the broader campus about that, or I should have coordinated that communication with the impacted communities, and I did not do that at the time. So then when we realized, I think we asked some questions, or the undergraduate education in the college was asking, do students know of this? We said no, and so that's when the communication was drafted and sent. So it was not an intentional not wanting to be transparent about the decision. It was more of a workload, just reality of the number of things that needed attention and short staffing that we were managing at the time.
I appreciate you, because I know that's probably not an easy thing to say. So I really, really appreciate you owning up to that. And yeah, I think you're really awesome for that. Thank you.
That doesn't take away that it's an impact, and I acknowledge that too, right? So I appreciate that acknowledgement, but there's an impact here. And so when we acknowledge the impact, we want to also think about ways to think about how to manage the impact. And so maybe at that point, Norma, there are two things that I think we want to make sure that we share with you. One, about student representation and how voices are going to come into the Center for Accessible Education, broadly speaking, and two, about how we can think through an exceptions process so that moving forward, not necessarily right tomorrow we can launch this, but we think thoughtfully about how students that really need 19 units of priority enrollment can seek that through an exceptions process. So if you want us to move there, we can go there, or we can continue to take questions.
Yeah, so I think I see a lot of hands up. I see more questions in the chat, which I think the questions that will be asked, I think should be brought up later. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Jane, who I know has been in communication with DSU. So she might have a few questions.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for being here and for your explanations. Thank you, Maria, for taking accountability for that. That's definitely much appreciated. So I wanted to ask this directed more toward, I guess, Adriana and Dr. Ketty. So in this, I just wanted to point out one thing too. I know I don't want to be like blaming anyone for this, but I know that in Academic Senate, Adriana, you listed a lot of like kind of statistics based on like priority enrollment and student stuff like that. I just like wanted to make it clear that a decision like this can't be made on averages, because even one student not having access to the education that they are legally entitled to is a violation of the ADA. And I wanted to ask Dr. Ketty to, like, in this conversation that CAE was invited to, were any of these concerns directly stated? Like the fact that it can't be made on averages and stuff like that.
I am speaking now from my recollection of that very brief conversation over a year ago. And I can say that I didn't have any idea at that time of what this ad hoc committee was basing their determinations on. So I can share that what I shared with the committee at that time was information about why priority enrollment was important for students with disabilities. Some of the information that I had on hand related to the primary various groups of students with disabilities who benefited from priority enrollment and who priority enrollment was essential for. We did not speak really specifically, and Adriana, you can correct me if I'm not remembering correctly, but there wasn't really a discussion around the details. That myself and the ADA compliance officer were sharing information, but not privy to the other discussions that were happening. I think I just want to also, Jane, if I may chime in and say, we're not breaking the law. If we were breaking the law, we would have to course correct. So I want to be really clear that this change is not breaking the law. I understand the concerns that are presented in the conversation. I understand the need for and the clear legal requirement and mandate that the university has to make sure that disabled students have equitable access to the curriculum. That is not what is how we are framing understanding this situation. Students with disabilities will maintain access to priority enrollment, just at a lower level than they were previously. And looking at the data that Dean Galvan offered, what we saw by and large was students with disabilities tapping into 15 units of priority enrollment. And so I would just say that looking at this from a legal standpoint, I don't want to let it be not named that we don't see this as a change that breaks the law.
And also, I just want to add to that and say that although the priority enrollment cap is now at 15, that all students can enroll beyond that once all students have had at least 10 units that they have enrolled in for courses.
I think I was just going to say, I did see in one of the written comments that was shared that Cassandra read suggested that student regent scholars and have a different, I don't know about that detail, and we haven't discussed it, but we can go back and at that public comment that was offered in written form can be looked at for how that's understood. But Jane, just to the point about it being legal or not legal, we want to be clear about that.
Okay, thank you. Jane, sorry, you have the floor again.
Yeah, I think why don't you let everyone else ask their questions first, and then just for everyone, if Breeze, Maria, if everyone's okay with that, I think soon, once everyone gets all their questions answered, we can move away from questions and talk more about where we're going from here and what the plans are.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you, Jane. And
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the importance. I know, Adriana, you said that students can still enroll in over 15 units, but the priority is capped at 15 units. And I just wanted to echo the importance of having like more priority units for students because of the reasons that students presented at public comment and in the testimony that they that was published. And the fact that the 19 units or 21 units for some colleges provides a buffer to students. And that's especially important if they're in a class and they find out that their professor is unaccommodating or unforeseen circumstances arise and they have to drop the class. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind too. And my question is more so for Dr. Ketty. And I just wanted to ask if there was anything that CAE did in response to the decision made by undergraduate council.
Are you asking at the time that the decision was made or just recently?
Yeah, at the time that the decision was made.
Yeah, at the time that the decision was made, no action was taken. And I know Dr. Dean Blandisi took accountability for that. And I also take accountability for that. I don't, no action was taken at that time. And I think we can share various reasons why that might have been the case, but I think that that's just I think the conclusion of what happened once the decision was made.
Angie, did you have another question? Awesome. I will be moving, I believe Herman, then Carl. There you go.
Thank you. I have a few comments and questions. First, I want to go back to a comment that Dean Galvan made earlier about students with disabilities or students with the CAE accommodations still being able to sort of request on a case-by-case basis to have their priority enrollment heightened depending on students. And I did want to say that I don't think it's right to assume a baseline of lower need for students with disabilities rather than starting everyone on the most equitable baseline possible. And I think this connects me to the added issue of labor that will be put upon CAE to have to review more case by case students having to submit those requests, which will increase the labor that they have to do simply to increase requests that could be avoided by simply giving everyone that priority access that makes it the most equitable for students receiving those accommodations, rather than having those who are working in the CAE have to go through the added labor of reviewing those applications when they could be focusing their efforts more towards actually providing those accommodation services to students. And to the question, the issue about Regent scholars, and I also want to touch on the fact that a couple of students have put in the Q&A, student athletes are another group that substantially receive priority enrollment units. To speak briefly to my experience as a Regent scholar, the priority enrollment is a perk. And it is not the case for students with disabilities that it is a perk. It is a necessity to have that equitable access. And for me, the units that I receive, I know for me are helpful, and it's nice and it's an honor, but I don't need those to be successful, to graduate in 4 years. And that it's simply different for students with these accommodations and disabilities to have those issues of access. And so I do want to ask, why were other groups that received priority, what was the consideration process like for those groups? Who was a part of those conversations? And why were no other reductions made across the other groups that also received priority enrollment?
Yeah, those are really good questions. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. No, I do want to just say really quickly, I think that, while it's important that, the university shouldn't have cut out from everyone, I do believe that, for student athletes, and at least speaking with a lot of student athletes at the university, I also understand why their priorities are not cut. They are laborers at the university that are often taken advantage of a lot of the time. So I do want to cut in and say that, just because I think that that's also important to note, and that a lot of the times their practices do inhibit them. So they're only restricted to a short amount of time to do that. But yeah, sorry, Dean Galvan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Breeze. I was going to make the same point about student athletes. I think you raise a very important point about the labor that's going to take to review the exemptions, and I leave it to my colleagues at CAE to think through that. I can speak more specifically to the decision making around the other groups, and specifically Regent scholars. So I agree with you that the original reason they received priority enrollment was as a recruitment tool. As you note, it's a perk. And so the reduction for the Regent scholars went from 13 to 10 And over time, the discussion that the committee had was that eventually would be phased out, rather than to remove it completely. But that will be in the hands of the next ad hoc committee that will be charged by the undergraduate council. So in the recommendations made by the current committee, ad hoc committee, the second to the last recommendation was that the undergraduate council established a standing ad hoc committee to review the data and commit to reviewing the data for all students to see whether it's working, whether the students we granted priority enrollment to this time around, students with dependents, whether that served that population, and whether how the data there, but also to students with CAE.
Thank you, Dean Galvan. Erman, did you have another question?
I had just one more comment I wanted to make, that I received in consultation specifically from transfer students who receive CAE accommodations. I do want to mention that a substantial portion, nearly 30% of transfer students have some sort of CAE accommodation at the institution. And for many transfer students, a lower priority enrollment that is affected by the CAE accommodations also affects other aspects, such as the equity of transferring from another institution and receiving much less accommodation from UCLA than they received at their previous institution, largely California community colleges that offer more access and support than UCLA offers them when they come here. And then additionally, the added financial burden that transfer students do tend to face when it comes to having to deal with these issues of accommodations at the hand of the institution. So one of the other things that I think, as we turn our conversation, more broadly to the future of this decision and dealing with what is to come next, that also the transfer students that do also experience some of the disproportionate issues to access, especially transfer students with disabilities, are also a part of the decision-making process when it comes to things like this in the future. But yeah, thank you for those answers. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And sorry, Carl, I hate to cut you off real quick. I'm going to call on Tessa, and then you're right up next. So Tessa, you're free to speak and ask a question. Tessa, are you trying to speak? We can't hear you.
Okay. I'm so sorry about that. I have two questions. The first I'd like to direct to Dean Galvan and Dean Blandisi. Is there going to be any other, well, I'd like to preface this by saying, in the past, I know students have had a lot of trouble with transparency between the administration and students. I'd like to ask if there's going to be any more transparency on this issue, if we have are going to have access to any materials or records of the process, and if we can know more about it other than what you guys are telling us now, because I do appreciate that, but I'd like to know more. And my second question is, I think it is unfair for disabled students to bear the brunt of your failures to communicate this policy change effectively. I'm wondering why there wasn't a postponement once you realized that we were giving dangerously little time to disabled students to make these arrangements. I'd like to add that beyond being ableist, it's also classist for students who simply don't have the money to make last minute arrangements because being disabled is really expensive. And if there's going to be an exemptions process in the future, that's great. But if the policy is going into effect now, that is still going to have a very real impact. So is there going to be anything done to take accountability with actions rather than just words?
I can speak to, thank you for the question. I can speak to the transfer of information, and yes, we're happy to provide it.
And picking up off of that, then maybe immediate next steps would be to to engage in further conversation about thinking about what the exemption process might look like for this going forward. I appreciate the acknowledgement about the workload associated with that. So we want to think about, similar to how students think about getting access to housing, like a housing appeals process, what it might look like to do that for additional access to priority enrollment. In terms of the transparency, maybe Norma, you can speak about the advisory structure that you're creating to describe kind of next steps related to ongoing conversations.
Sure. Some of you may know about some of the efforts of CAE to continue to work towards increased communication and transparency with students. And I know even despite where we are, I think we've come a long way from where we were, and there's still work to be done. So one of our few efforts in the last few months has been to put together an advisory board for the CAE. And so that advisory board will be made up of faculty and students. And we are just in the process of finalizing who the members of that advisory board will be. And that will kick off in the fall quarter. And so the faculty have all been finalized. There's about 9 faculty, a part of the advisory board, and a similar number of students who put in requests to join the board and who were reviewed. So that is one method that we are expecting moving forward to be a route of continued communication, collaboration, communication, cooperation with faculty and students. And I envision this being a continued topic of discussion in that space, and that the exception process will also be brought into that space to be finalized. I just off of the top of my head, I envision an exception process that would be as minimally burdensome to students as possible. And so I think that those details will be worked out in collaboration with students. Any feedback that you all have right now for us to move forward with, and will be done with a lot of care and intentionality around how to support students who need in an increased number of units to enroll in.
I think the other thing to offer also, Tessa, is that you had asked what did we do immediately to acknowledge that this was having an impact, and we engaged with the registrar's office to see what possibilities could exist to reverse course or change course. At the same time, acknowledging that just because there might have been an ability to do that, this is a shared governance model, and this decision doesn't get reversed without also going back to the appropriate entities that made and the study and the decision. But as we understand it, the coding that needed to occur to make sure that the systems worked in an online format had gone live. And so we weren't in a position to try to even open up the door to recalibrate this at this point. But I think, to Dean Galvan's point, that one of the recommendations was to establish a standing ad hoc committee to review priority enrollment. And with that, this can continue also to be a point of conversation. Dean Galvan, anything else to add to that?
No, thank you for mentioning those.
Is it all right if I respond really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for saying that. I'm glad. I'm really glad that you're taking these steps. Once again, though, our lives are being impacted really intensely by this. And I'm hearing a lot of conversation about the future and continuing conversations and thinking about starting initiatives and stuff. But we do need solutions now. Like, we do. And you have the luxury of time, and we don't have that at all. So I'm glad that you will be moving forward with more intentionality than you've displayed in the past. But it's really disappointing on this end.
Tessa, would it be helpful, I mean, in addition to speaking with your disability advisor and counselor, Oftentimes when there are students in distress, we also have case management services available to assist. So you don't have to come forward now with that request, but if it would be helpful, I'll offer my email in the chat, and we can connect you to additional support structures with the immediacy of the reality. And I'll offer that to any student. Should you or any member of the council need a student that needs additional support, I would offer case management services.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure if that was necessarily appropriate in front of everyone, but I will pass it over to Carl.
Okay, thank you. First off, I want to thank all the students that came out and spoke on behalf of this today. Your voice is being heard, though I know sometimes, well, this specific situation makes it seem as if it's not. I just wanted to come in and say that, I kind of think this is ridiculous, especially if we look at it from a moral aspect. Of course, it's ridiculous, but if we even look at it from a mechanical and just a leadership perspective, this decision was made over a year ago. When COVID was, it wasn't even in full swing yet, right? So if we even look at it from just a common sense perspective, we haven't had a pandemic like COVID in a while that's killed hundreds of thousands of people, right? So COVID has affected individuals in ways that, we still don't know how these effects are actually going to play out, right? So we're entering a post-COVID America right now. So I think that it's important to remember that there are students that have been affected by COVID in ways that they'll never recover from, especially disabled students. So they need every amount of flexibility that they can be offered. So I think that if we can't even, if this can't be reversed or reassessed from a moral standpoint, right, which it should be, then it should definitely be reassessed or relooked at from a mechanical aspect of, hey, we made this decision when COVID was just starting, right? And so everyone is kind of still figuring out their life. I think even some of the deans here can probably still can attest to that. So every student that is already in a bad situation or in a situation in which that they need every help that they can get, they should definitely be offered that. So my question specifically is just, of course, it's been 11 months, right? Has this decision been reassessed with COVID in mind? Has it been reassessed at all? And if not, is it possible to be reassessed? Thank you.
So Carl, I'm hearing obviously the impact of COVID is still, we're still learning about how that is impacting students and students' lives. I don't think that the timing of this, when I referenced that it occurred and the world turned upside down in June of last year when we were at remote, it was my intention to describe that the timing of this was the staff were stretched thin, and we didn't circle back to on June 9th when that was communicated to us in 2020. We didn't circle back to thinking about the communication that needed to go out. But Dean Galvan, I think from a timing perspective, described that this was looked at in 2019 to 2020, a year and a half meeting. Do I have that right, Dean Galvan? So not, this was prior to COVID.
Would it be okay if I went next, please?
Yes, Jane, you can go ahead and go.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, again, thank everyone for being here and for listening. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I think are a bit concerning about the way that we've gone about this so far. I think it's really great, and I really am so happy that everyone has taken public accountability here. But I think it's really important that this public accountability goes into actions, and also that this decision is reversed as soon as possible. I know we had talked about an exemption process, but I wanted to say that currently the CAE disability specialist to student ratio is 1 to 600. The national average is 1 to 250. And we understand there are funding issues, but I don't understand how students are expected to get a further exemption among the further things that they have to go through. We have evidence in the public USAC folder, which if Cass can please send, of students going through multiple disability specialists in a year, of students not getting emails back from their disability specialists for weeks on end. And I agree that we shouldn't be putting more work on these disability specialists than to than putting it on like for students. I also like wanted to say too, I know we've talked about like student athletes and other marginalized groups and stuff, and I want to say that it's not okay to pit students against each other. Every single student deserves access to their education. If there's an issue with too many students having priority enrollment, I feel like that at its core is an issue of there not being enough classes and there not being enough professors. And the solution to that is not to reduce priority enrollment from anybody. I also want to say, like, for undergraduates on the committee too, it shouldn't be blamed on them because they can only give recommendations. And I want to say too is that it's great that you guys are like saying that we can have more transparency in the future, but I would like to hear from Maria, Adriana, Norma, everyone who's here today about the tangible next steps that you are going to take publicly to reverse this decision and ensure transparency in the future. Like literally like 2 months ago, CAE voided a $30,000 check that students had gotten in order to add like to redesign the CAE without telling. And after that, they promised more transparency. And last year, they promised more transparency. We really need to hear tangible things. And I want to know that I know you guys work extremely hard. I know your jobs are extremely hard, but I want to say that this isn't a part of your jobs that can slip through the cracks. Students getting an accessible education at this school that they pay thousands of dollars for, tens of thousands of dollars for, needs to be the first priority. Also, like the other thing I wanted to mention too is that I know there is some like issues about like whether it's like legal or not, and I'm not going to sit here and argue about any of that because I'm going to be frank, don't know the law very well. But I wanted to say that I know DSU, the Disabled Student Union, has been in contact with Disability Rights California, and they have said that this is grounds for there being some legal issues here. And I wanted to say too that the current ADA 504 compliance officer works under the CAE, which is a huge conflict of interest in something that should also be remedied. And again, I understand that you guys work really hard and that this isn't in control of everybody. And I understand that many mistakes were made across the board here. But I wanted to ask, what tangible steps are we taking now? What tangible steps can you commit to now to ensure that this fall quarter, disabled students who need 19 units of priority enrollment can get 19 units of priority enrollment?
Jane, there's a lot there that I want to address, but I also want to narrow the conversation to the issue at hand. And so let me just say that at the outset, the intention here is to support students that need additional support with access through an exceptions process, but there is no intention of reversing this decision. And I want to be really clear about that. We attempted to review what was possible, and I understand that that has been advocated for. And I also heard in public comment the need for Norma as the director to serve as an advocate to reverse this decision. That isn't in Norma's purview. She does not have the power to do that, and the decision will not be reversed. We are going to manage the impact of this decision on individual students, and we're going to think about that very intentionally, and we're going to continue to stay in conversation. And if it would be helpful for me and others to pick up the conversation on the number of other concerns that you put forward in the summary of your comments, then there is an ongoing conversation that Norma has with DSU leadership every other week to continue that conversation. So I don't want to skirt the issue and say we will be able to reverse this decision. That is not possible at this point.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I agree that maybe we can focus on this decision now. So if we aren't able to reverse the decision, what processes are being put in place? Is there possibility we can delay the decision to at least the fall? And also I would like to know like why it's not possible to reverse the decision.
Yeah, I can offer an answer to that. Thank you, Jane. The reason it's not possible to reverse the decision is because this is a Senate decision. And this is, we operate at UCLA under shared governance. And so it is not under our authority, either me as the dean or them as leadership at Student Affairs, to make a decision that counters what the faculty voted on. The committee voted on, and then the faculty as part of the undergraduate council. What I will say is that As I noted before, the one recommendation was to establish a standing committee within the undergraduate council. And so what I'm going to do now is, in the spirit of continuity that we discussed before, is pass along this information and these discussions to the incoming undergraduate council chair to ensure that that ad hoc committee that standing committee gets established. And that is the committee to which the students who receive priority enrollment through CAE can advocate and appeal this process, this decision, sorry.
Thank you for that, Dean Galvan. Jane, did you have any other questions?
No, that was a good clarification. Thank you. Yeah, you can go to everyone else with their hands up.
Awesome. I think I saw Emily's hand next, then Taylani.
Yeah, hello. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone who came here to share their stories already, especially to those who are students with disabilities. This shouldn't be your responsibility at all to continue expressing your extreme disappointment with how this is all going. And originally I was going to cite passages from the ADA, but I also understand that's not the purpose of this meeting. That being said, like, just letting for public record and everything like that, I don't see how the Senate's decision to reduce priority enrollment to 15 units in any way is in the spirit of ADA, as ADA is meant to empower students with people with disabilities to achieve equal opportunity. And in my view, that's even further making it hard. It's even more limiting and creating higher barriers towards equal opportunity. Because I understand, like, legislation can't do that on its own, but in my view, this is just make this decision made that barrier taller. But in any case, debating whether or not this is ADA compliant is not the subject of this meeting. I just wanted to support what Jane was saying, in that we want to make sure that moving forward, we can try to, I want to know what next steps will be taken by the parties that actually have the power. I believe Ms. Galvan was saying something about an appeal process, and I think that's something that an appeal process for this decision. I think that's something we'd all like to hear more about, and the parties that would be involved in getting that done so that we can contact them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's going to come under the jurisdiction of the undergraduate council. In the fall, they will establish this committee, the new undergraduate council chair goes into effect July 1st. So at that point, I can consult with her and share with her the urgent need to establish this committee. And then at that point, it will be up to the committee to determine what that process will be.
Awesome. Breeze, I can go now, right?
Yes, sorry, I was going to call on you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. I guess I just needed additional clarification earlier on in the conversation about if, given that not all disabled students are not using the 19-unit priority enrollment cap, why is it necessary to decrease the unit cap for the disabled students that do, especially given what Angie said, if a student joins into class where the professor won't be as accommodating to disabled students in the classroom, they may need a buffer class or something of that nature to satisfy financial aid or things of that nature. But I guess given in light of the fact that Academic Senate and that there's no way for us to revoke that decision at this time, I guess that concern can be revisited at a later time. I guess I'm just very unimpressed by the solutions to mitigate harm. I'm also very frustrated given that the fact that the appeal process is not created yet, in light of the fact that enrollment is happening in the next few weeks too. So if a disabled student wants to petition to have more units, that appeal process is not already created beforehand. So I guess my question at this moment is, given that that appeal process is not finalized, what appeal process do disabled students have at this moment, given that enrollment starts next week or in the next 2 weeks?
I think an action item that Norma and I can take back is to think about how best to structure a process and what we can stand up immediately as an action item. Norma, is that a fair action item for us?
Definitely. I think it might be beneficial to just clarify that because of the timing, that new process will not be implemented in time for the enrollment that starts next week. But we definitely hope for it to be implemented for the next quarter's enrollment.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I have a quick follow-up on that. Will students be involved in this process? Disabled students specifically, I should add.
Definitely. Like I was saying, we actually do plan to continue meeting CAE leadership with DSU leadership and USAC FAC representatives throughout the summer. So that'll be a discussion there. And that will be one of the first agenda items for the the advisory board with students and faculty to discuss in the fall quarter.
Thank you.
Great. Cassandra?
Yeah, at first I was going to comment about like transparency, but I am aware that this has been brought up many times. But from the education work group that I was in last week, I was told from Dean Galvan that this decision was made in 2020, but it was announced a year late. And as you mentioned today, that you chaired for the committee knowing that this was going to be changed and failed to be transparent with the student body. So I just wanted to stress the importance to all administrators in this call for being more transparent with the students, especially when big decisions like this will negatively affect students, as like seen in the public comment and with the advocacy work from many students on campus. I also was wondering, is there a possibility for students to appeal for 19 unit priority?
I think the hope is that we will implement a new process prior to the next enrollment period that will be minimally burdensome for students. I hope to really work with students and faculty to develop a process where we can easily get in contact with the students who are currently approved for priority enrollment and identify who needs to have the additional units allocated. And so that process will hopefully be underway within the next couple months.
Thank you. I see Tadeo's hand up.
Hello. Yes, I wanted to bring up something. So when this decision was made, the mean was 15 units, I believe. And so presumably that means like 50% of all CAE students with priority enrollment were enrolling in over 15 units. So say that 50% all applies for the exemption. Are we not going to be back where we started? And on the other hand, let's say that not all of those people apply for the exemption, then that could be because of different circumstances. Maybe they don't have the time or etc. Is that not, on the other hand, preventing them from having the resource that they had before?
I may have to ask you to repeat that second part of the question to make sure I understand, but the first part of your question, that doesn't mean that it's 50% of the students. It means that the majority of students are taking 15 units, and by week 3, the number of priority enrollment units that they're still enrolled in is 13 units. And then can you repeat the next part of your question? I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
Yeah, I was just going to say that maybe this will be a little bit clearer. So the people that do need to apply for the exemption, I mean, we at this point, it's all up in the air. We don't know how long it'll be. But, the concern of what if they don't have the time, or maybe the resources to apply for that. And then in that sense, they've been blocked.
I see.
I mean, I can share just ideas, and hopefully you all can also get in contact with me, if not sharing ideas now after this meeting. But I think some of my thoughts are that we'll be able to time it so that once we determine the exception process, there will be enough time, hopefully, to allow for students to get in contact with us. I also expect that we'll do some intentional outreach to particular students registered who we know may be more or more impacted, to say it in the simplest form, by the change in units. And so there will be some intentional outreach, and I think the hope is that there will be enough time to allow for students to get in contact with us.
Okay, and I think that goes back to the question of, the transparency, and I think that is important.
Okay, great. So we want to try to wrap it up. So if all folks that wish to continue to speak can raise their hands so I can call on them. I'm going to go Promise, then Pasta.
I actually think Pasta's hand was up first.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. Pasta, sorry?
Yeah, so, first of all, I want to thank all the students who came out and gave public comment and told us about their experiences. You guys shouldn't have to do that. It shouldn't be your burden to bear. I also want to thank the deans for coming out here and having this conversation with us and the rest of the student body. It's very important. I want to emphasize that today is, June 8th, and enrollment starts next week. So, my point here is that there is urgency. It's, very important because people are planning their course schedules right now as we speak. So if there's any appeal or exemption process that needs to happen or be made, I'd like to emphasize that the resources and the manpower, it needs to be mobilized ASAP, right? We have, less than a week essentially to make sure that people are able to go through these processes because this decision has already been made. So I would, again, I'll emphasize that that's the responsibility that needs to, and something that needs to be done. So on to my question. First, I want to make sure I'm understanding something correctly. So I think, so in 2009, according to what one of the deans said, 33% of students were receiving some form of priority enrollment, and 15 units on average are being used via priority enrollment. And the decision that was made recently was made so that we can ensure that we never reach that 33% level again. So I want to ask, first of all, why does reaching that level matter? I understand there are concerns about obviously enrollment for the entire student population being affected, but I want to know why that is the cutoff number for the cutoff number for those bad effects, quote unquote, for those bad effects. What is the logic there? And second, again, in light of COVID-19, why is that number still that number, right? Why is 33% still the concern here? Because if that was the concern that we had because of back in 2009, then why aren't we considering again how COVID-19 has affected the education of so many students on campus? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. So the concern of reaching 33% priority enrollment is not so much for students who do not receive priority enrollment, it's actually for the students who receive priority enrollment. So if 33% of the population is receiving priority enrollment, and in courses only, I think it's a maximum of 50% of the course can be enrolled through priority enrollment, then even those students who receive priority enrollment, because there are so much of them at 33%, would not be able to enroll in those courses. So in other words, over time, priority enrollment would lose value. It'd be less helpful to the students who need the priority enrollment. Does that, I'm not sure if
that makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then this is kind of an accrued problem, right? That happens over time. So
yes,
why do we have to do this now to prevent those bad effects from happening, especially given, again, the reality of the situation that we're living in now? Why couldn't we have discussed this later or reconsidered it? Thank you.
Right, exactly. That's kind of the issue, is that if it's not monitored, it balloons up over time to the point of then at that point when it's 33%, everybody, massive reductions are made. Entire groups are removed from priority enrollment. And so in an effort to avoid that plateau that then makes priority enrollment meaningless, that's why it is reviewed every 10 or so years ago. So as I mentioned, the last one was reviewed in 2009, and then the process again started in 2019. Prior to that, it was 1990.
And I think it's also important that there wasn't a removal of priority enrollment, but
Right,
just
yeah.
right, so that there was a compromise, if you will, or a gradation of to 15
Yes.
units.
Right. Mhm. And I should say that the committee also reviewed proposals from other groups. Maybe I already mentioned it, I can't remember, but and we considered those as well, but recognized that there are students who have greater need for priority enrollment, and that in honoring it to all the student groups who wanted it, we would again be in the same position of not being able to offer it to the students who, for the reasons you all have stated, depend on priority enrollment in order to achieve their enrollments.
I think also, Pasa, I hear the urgency that you are naming, and that we are a week away from this. And at the same time that we are a week away from this, I'm also hearing the need for engagement and conversation and problem solving together. And so, acknowledging that you're in the middle of finals and that this is going to start by early next week. We don't want to promise that we're going to offer up a solution that then we're not going to be able to converse and problem solve with you with the appropriate communities on. So our intention here is to be honest and transparent and say we will look at this to make sure that by fall we have a process that we can stand up, and that process can be developed in consultation with DSU, with students on the advisory board, with the academic senate, to make sure that they are also in alignment with how the CA is thinking about this. Not to say that we're just going to sit on our hands and wait until a week prior for the next time that this occurs and then make a change. We want to intentionally go through a series of conversations to make sure that we structure the process correctly. But I also hear the urgency. So if there's a desire for that urgency to be managed by the CAE, then we can attempt to do that. But that would then not achieve the other ask that you have of us, where we're trying to remain in communication with you.
Great. Thank you, Dean Blandisi. Al Popcorn. Oh, I'll call on Jane. Sorry. Oh. No, it's okay. No, Promise was first. Sorry. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, I had a couple questions. And because I kind of just want to bring this conversation in to the urgency that we are talking about. And it's kind of been asked, but it hasn't been answered fully. And so my first question is, because we are a week out, I hear it's great that we want to have a more formalized process with these new policies that can take place into the coming fall. But we are in a point where there are students who have come and expressed today that without having their full priority enrollment, especially with the transition back to campus, which is something that has not been emphasized, I think enough at this point, is when they have to enroll for the fall in this next coming week, what are you going to do now to provide these students who genuinely need this, who to reach out to, who to reach out to so that they can have this resolved for themselves? Because addressing the individual issues right now is what is the most important before thinking about creating a formalized process that's going to do that is indeed it needs student input, it needs all these things that we've been discussing, but in this moment right now, when it's a week out, a week and a half out, what are you as administrators going to do to create to open something up that is going to require more labor on your end, but at the end of the day, this is as a result of oversight So more labor is necessary. So like, what are you planning to do to like help the students who genuinely need it right now? And like, for me, some suggestions that I can give is having someone to like, so you can direct students to specifically reach out to, and the students who genuinely need it will, and they can help, like can figure out whatever with the registrar, because I know not reprogramming everything, but that is at least something to like accommodate the students who need it right now. So like, how are you planning to accommodate the students who need it right now, and not telling folks that like it's just going to have to wait until there's a like formalized process that has to take a summer to create?
I think, Norma, you and I can take back the urgency question and see what process we can stand up right now, promise to your point, and we can get back to you, tomorrow or Thursday. Norma, yeah, Thursday, with a plan for what we can stand up right now to address the immediate impact on individual students.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And like, we'll definitely, I think I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think like me and my fellow council members will definitely like hold y'all to that, because it is extremely urgent, and like there needs to be something done now. And like my second question is essentially, there have, oh, sorry.
Question for the communication. Jane, you wrote to us and you asked who was going to be present in this space, and I replied all. Shall I use that as the mechanism by which I reply, or Norma replies all, to what immediate process will stand up to assist students with immediate? Or is there another email group that we should be focused on?
I think that one should be fine. That one had all of council.
Okay. So promise you'll see us reply to that message, and that's the same group that we also shared the academic senate message that went to the group of students that wrote in with this original concern.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah. And my next question has to do with like creating like more formalized process for this, and also just like creating ad hoc committees, creating advisory boards. What are the plans to compensate students for their time and energy? I think that in the past year, like folks in public comment have like emphasized that their time and energy have gone into attempting and trying to have their voices heard and listened to by administration, and advocating for themselves. The brunt of the work has been put on the communities who are supposed to be getting help from the administration. And I think that especially in the time of a pandemic, when people are extremely are struggling, like what as like administrators, as an institution, how are you planning to compensate students for their time and energy on these committees? Like, yeah, essentially.
I can share just in relation to our advisory board that we do, we have already informed our student members that they will be compensated. It's not a huge amount, but we wanted to, we were thinking along the same lines as you promised, and wanted to ensure that our student members were compensated for the work and the time that they were putting in.
Thank you. So I'll be closing off because we do have BOD appointments tonight, and those will probably take another hour. So I will call on Dej. I don't know if you still wanted to speak, Dej, and I'll be closing off with Jane.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was gonna say that like I understand about like the timing thing. Like I've kind of gotten over that because I felt like the pandemic was hard on all of us, and over that on the sense that like I can see how that happened, you know what I mean? And the pandemic was hard on us, so I could see how like you were stretched thin, and it sounds like Dean Blandisi, you were doing kind of like 2 jobs. And so, you know, I want to just say that and saying that like I see you and the work and stuff like that. But I think whomever put together the package did a really shoddy job, because like the things that we're talking about right now, like the appeals process and this and that, it's kind of like saying, like, I don't know, just giving someone something like without any context. It's like I can't come up with like a good analogy right now, but my point is, it's like you you put together something, or I guess you didn't even put it together. You just were like, oh, we're gonna do this, but then there was no like context to it. There was no substance to it. I'm just really confused, honestly. And and I hate saying that because I hate like criticizing people, but it really was shoddy work, because it's like I'm hearing from all my fellow CAE students, and I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. And I'm like, dang, whoever put this together, you couldn't brainstorm for 5 minutes? Because I could see myself coming up with like some, some things like, okay, there has to be a solution, because I forget who said it, but like the student who has to wait for like the van and stuff like that freaking sucks. I feel for that guy. Like, that's a perfectly good reason as to like someone who needs to go through that extra step. Like, why weren't they thought of? And that like makes me not like sad for them and like angry. Like, ugh, I'm not I'm a physical science major. I'm not good with my words, as you can tell. But another thing that I was going to say is, like, for me personally, what I deal with, I have trouble moving around and like doing stuff. So it's like going to be hard for me to go through the whole process, which I'm going to do. Like, that's life. I just wanted to put that out there as like the whole priority enrollment obviously is to give us more access, and it's harder for us. So yeah, that's it. I know I got to get going, but I appreciate you listening to me, because yeah, I know that you guys work hard, and if I were on the other side of it, like, yeah, I because it is personal, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dej. And we'll close out with Jane.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm just gonna close off real quick. None of the things I say like need answers or any of that. I'm gonna say too, I appreciate Maria and Norma volunteering to have that exemptions process ASAP. I'm gonna make it very clear some questions that I think need to be answered in the exemptions process are: how are we going to ensure that students are guaranteed the exemptions they need in a timely manner? Students have stated wait times of like 3 weeks for a simple email reply, and how are we going to guarantee that the wait time is far less than that? And how are we going to guarantee that every student can get exemptions? As you saw from 12 pages of testimony, this obviously affects students. And in the future, how are we going to ensure that there is student input at every aspect of this decision? We like future decisions. And I think too that it needs to be clear that this is not the first time that the CAE has misused, not been transparent, and not given students the accommodations they need. I don't know too much about Academic Senate, and I respect all the work that you do and all the work that the CAE does in general, but I think some options that really need to be looked into are: why is there a 1 to 600 ratio for disability specialists to students? I'm not sure if any of you guys can do anything about that. I understand, but why is that? Why do students need to know? And then I want to close off by the fact that you guys have talked a lot about wanting to outreach more. And as someone who does have biweekly meetings with the CAE, I would love and I expect to be outreach too. Because what happened in this case was students were given this decision and then they mobilized and then they outreach to you all without people contacting students first. So I think that one of the major things, and I won't speak for anyone else, but when I think that one of the major things that needs to happen is that students need to be incorporated from the beginning, not after the ramifications and after the students. The first people that should be emailed when there is being a decision made about disabled students is the Disabled Student Union. Because those are the people who actually live that. And I just wanted to say thank you all for coming, and thank you all for explaining and clarifying a lot of the things that we didn't understand. I'm looking forward to hearing what your plans are in the future.
Great. Thank you so much. Really want to thank Dr. Katie, Dean Blandisi, Dean Galvan for coming in today and, being receptive to the criticism students had. And yeah, we just really appreciate you guys coming out. I mean, it's really late. So we all look forward, I think we can say, to that email that we receive. And we appreciate, the accountability that was taken tonight and just the receptiveness. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for
Thank
Thank you for having us.
Of course, thank you. Great. So we will be moving straight into BOD appointments. I apologize in advance to our BOD appointments. If you can promote Woodia and Megan, please. Cass, I would appreciate it. Want to apologize to our appointments. I know that I had told you guys to log in at 7. Our meeting went a bit longer than that, but really appreciate you guys, sticking it out. And, this was an important discussion we had to have. So we appreciate that on our end. Great. So we're going to go ahead and start off with Woodia. So the way appointments goes, I know it's the first time that we're going to be doing this. It's a 1-minute intro, 15 minutes Q&A, and 1-minute closing. Then ARC recommendations and deliberations as a council, and then we would take a vote. Yeah, so I just want to start off by saying that's how it goes, if I remember correctly. And yeah, we're really excited to get this started. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with Woodia. Woodia will be my full BOD appointment. I guess both will be my BOD appointments, but hopefully, well, not my BOD appointments until you guys approve her. But yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce Woodia. Woodia is a second year right now. She's pre-business econ. And I've just, everything I've learned from Woodia, she's very passionate. She, currently helps out Title I schools in like tutoring and, she's very involved with the community, but not only that, she has a passion for the work. And I know, especially looking at like our board of directors, they are students that oversee like the Bruin Resource Center, and they deal with a lot of administrative aspects that I think Woodia would fit in and qualify very well for. So I'm really excited to bring her forth today. And not only did she apply, but she did a lot of outreach with the current BOD appointments. She set up meetings with 3 of the 4 directors, which definitely takes time in the pandemic to set up those meetings. So really want to acknowledge her for doing all of that work and labor. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Woodia for her 1-minute intro.
Hi everyone, my name is Woodia Kamara. I use she, her pronouns, and as Breeze has already introduced, I am a second-year student. Thank you all for inviting me here today, and it's just a great opportunity. As a first-generation minority student who moved to the United States a couple years ago in pursuit of a better educational opportunities, my interest in an appointment stems from my passion for student advocacy and well-being that has been cultivated through my various campus leadership roles this past year, amongst many others, specifically through my role as Bruin Resource Center student leadership board member. I engaged with fellow student leaders in discussing advocacy points for improved and equitable resources for the diverse community of students represented within the center, especially those that have been historically marginalized. As a leader, it has always been natural for me to actively strive for the change I want to see in my life and society, which has manifested through community service and care, most significantly in mentoring students from LA Title I schools to achieve their academic potentials through Boone Corps. And some, I would say, my experiences this past year in Academic Senate, Office of the President, and so many other spaces out of USAC have not only buttressed my passion to serve the undergrad community, but equipped me with the necessary skills to do so, which I would love to further carry out through the role of ASU CLE Board of Directors if given the opportunity by you all. But thank you.
Thank you, Woodia. So now we will be moving into Q&A. We have 15 minutes, folks, so please make sure you ask important questions for the specific position. Jane?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. so excited to have you. I just kind of like wanted to ask you, what do you see as like the most important thing, opportunity, I guess, that like a student on BOD can have, and like, yeah, like what are some things you would love to see from being on BOD?
Through my research into applying into the role and meeting, like conducting informational interviews with students that are currently part of the board, I've realized that there's like some sort of like accessibility gap in terms of like understanding that not many students know that this board of directors actually exists. So for me, I think it would be more about transparency and accountability. Specifically in working with USAC, knowing that USAC has like a more direct access to student experiences, and how that can be more put forth towards like with the board itself, and also in terms of understanding that ASUCA is sort of seen as like separate from the student body, but it's not actually that separate, and it does have like a huge social following on Instagram, for example, and other ways of like connecting with students. And I think that's a way in which that we can enable people to see what goes on behind the scenes and how they can know that, oh, what are student funds going towards? Because I think most of the time people want to see like, oh, what is USAC doing with student funds, but then do not know that ASUCLA also controls the majority of those funds. And most of the data about funds like that, like the financials and the meetings, the agenda and everything, is actually publicly available. But even before I applied into this role, I did not know that. And I doubt like a majority of students do know that as well. So I do think that coming into this role, I want to create some sort of like transparency and accountability in terms of like opening more accessibility for students, primarily through USAC, since you all have individual communities that you serve, and how that information can better benefit those diverse communities individually.
Kaylani?
Awesome. Hi, Lydia. I loved your answer to the last question. My question is basically, given that you have outreach to like past BOD, I wanted to know what type of initiatives you would like to continue this upcoming year. And then you also touched on this already, but like what type of mistakes would you like to correct for the following year? If you want to provide more information for that last part of the question, you can.
After meeting with most of the board, 3 out of the 4 board of directors currently, I realized that they did talk about like the board of directors has like the committees are divided into two. So the standing committees, like the financial, the personnel, and executive, which are just like mainly administrative stuff. And they do have the the ad hoc committee, which by the bylaws can be used for any project throughout the year based on what the board members think it should be. For instance, this year's ad hoc committee, given like the climate of like social justice movements, have been more involved with like social justice advocacy, and specifically as an example, supporting the facilitation of the Black Bruin Resource Center. So for me, I think that's the type of work that I would want to like continue as well, just using that committee as an avenue for instituting different projects that arise as with student needs, regardless of like the different organizations or like diverse communities of students. And also, even with communicating with them, they also brought up like the thing about like not being able to like decipher like financials, the reports that are usually made within the board, and how to understand that, and even them as board directors to understand it, less alone talk about extending that information to others. So I think making that more accessible and for people to know that these are things that exist, this is what goes on and during the meetings, and that people can actually attend these meetings and probably, and all not probably, also bring up concerns. I think that would be a main goal, and to just like working with USAC to see like all these like individual needs that do arise based on like the earlier part of this meeting. We have seen a lot how like having just maybe 1 or 2 students within certain spaces kind of creates this generalization of what students actually need, when you do not like offer like that type of like outreach into specific communities. So I do think that the ad hoc committee can be like a nice safe space to be able to like cater for different needs.
Thank you, Lydia. Erman?
Thank you so much, Lydia. It's so good to see you again. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about a particular community that is typically been kept out of the board of directors space, which are transfer students and the non-traditional students that constitute the transfer student body that again have typically been not been a part of the board of director processes or meetings. And you've mentioned sort of accessibility as something that is important to you in these last few questions or last few answers that you've given. And so I would like to know if there are any sort of specific things that you would do to increase accessibility and transparency to transfer students and non-traditional students.
For that, I think it is also necessary to understand that while the position of the board of directors is like a student representative, it's more like a representation with rather than for. So for me, I would say definitely one thing that I do have in mind is to work specifically like with transfer communities, one of which like you actively lead, Herman, and just in understanding like all the needs of that community and how that can be catered for. For instance, in terms of like new student orientations that happen, those are actually facilitated for the 80% of that is usually facilitated by ASUCLA, and just to see how that can be made better for transfer students. And also in terms of like commuting, because I know like a majority of students, of transfer students have to commute to campus. And even as we do transition to online learning, it is necessary to, I know that it's necessary to understand that not a lot of students are going to be able to do that. And most of the students that will be like predicted to not be able to like do that just because of like financial reasons, or just because of distance, or having found that living at home has been economically and socially sustainable over the past year. I think it would be necessary to have more infrastructure in place to ensure that the campus space is more accessible to transfer students in terms of like transportation, and also spaces as well that they can be involved in. Also, additionally, I've been thinking too about and in terms of like the student working space, because as you all may know, ASUCLA is in charge of like the services, and it has like a huge part that's concerned with services and enterprises. So thinking about stuff like the UCLA store, all the restaurants on campus, the cafes and stuff like that, which for a majority of the people who work there are student workers, but just to see how, but those students who work there are not limited by financial aid or Pell Grant. So it is necessary to understand like who are the students that are being employed into these spaces, how are they being centered at, first as students, and especially when they do carry responsibilities of being like a transfer, for example.
Thank you so much, Rudia. So we are nearing the 10-minute mark. I'm going to take up to 5 more minutes of questions. So Sarah?
Thanks, Breeze. Hi, Rudia. So good to see you again. I'd love to know, given that the board of directors is in charge of a lot of the products, facilities, services, and programs that used to very much be in person, as we transition back into a hybrid space, can you share with us any ideas or thoughts you have to make this a smooth transition process and make sure that the services that are provided are accessible to all students, regardless of whether or not they can attend these activities in person?
Yeah, for sure. So that's like one of the main things too that I've been I pointed out to like as in my application as well, is that knowing that as we transition to like in-person learning, I think there's gonna be like this full focus on like having maybe in-person spaces, you know, like all the study spaces on campus, or like the eateries and stuff like that. But I think that we have seen that how much engagement too we can garner from the student body through virtual means. And I would advocate for having those virtual activities and virtual opportunities stay as they have been, catering to specific communities. And and that has been like one of the points of advocacy and platforms for AAC this past election. So I think working more in closely with them to ensure that what the type of accessibility that we've had this past year with virtual learning, even though like virtual learning has not been a bliss, but there are some like advantages to it as well, because it just gives people like a lot of more flexibility. And I think it would be very necessary to have those things back, those things to still maintain them. For instance, like if you're having like a physical study space, having stuff like the virtual study space, and one of the platforms of like the AAC right now is just having like community online groups with students to study and stuff like that, and just like all other the giveaways that ASUCLE usually does to promote student understanding in terms of like Scantrons, all these other things, and the UCLA bookstore to remain virtual, because that has been really nice over the past year. So people do not have to come to campus to get all their books. I think that would be nice, and just having like a lot more accessibility to ebooks rather than physical copy has also proven nice. I think that's going to be a good avenue of advocacy for hybrid learning as well. But yeah, there's just like so many, and I think all of those should be maintained in some sort of like capacity as we transition back to in person.
Okay, great. So I believe Emily's hand was up, and then Pasa, you're going to be the last question I take since we are almost out of time.
Hi, thank you for being here, Wudia. Just, sorry, oh boy. Oh, so you mentioned on your application that you view the board of directors role as seeking and advising on UCLA partnerships to ensure that they're not only profitable to student-run enterprises, but also sustainable and centering student needs. And so given that a lot of students are coming out of very negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic financially, I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on how you would center students' needs while also trying to maintain the financial viability of ASUCLA.
Okay. So as I thank you for your question, Emily. As I mentioned before, most of the enterprise at UCLA, like all the restaurants and stuff like that, cater for student labor. So I think for that can be a main point of ensuring that students get access to like these job opportunities on campus, that could enable them to alleviate their financial need. And also there's the I don't know if you all know this, you all might probably know this, but there's also like a philanthropy aspect of ASUCLA as well. And I think given this, it's kind of like a restricted fund, but given that we're coming out of a pandemic, I think a main point of advocacy for me would be trying to see like how that funding base can be made more accessible or increased for students as a whole rather than organization based. And also during my meetings like with the current ASUCLA board of directors, they mentioned how they usually like advocate for things like grad packages, for example, for some students who are currently graduating, but usually on campus, so like for example vouchers for certain communities like BGS, which I am part of. So I really resonated with that because they do help a lot in terms of like food boxes, like assistance to with like CPO and stuff like that. And I think that could be made more at a larger scale now that we were going back to in person, having like there's all these like vouchers for students for, and also in terms of like parking again, I think parking is like a huge problem for students on campus. So also like looking at that end in terms on trying to see how parking can be made more accessible for on people who have to commute to campus, probably reduce parking permits and things like that. I think all those little things accumulated together can sort of like relieve the financial burden that students have to experience while coming back to campus whilst transitioning back to in-person learning.
Thank you so much, Rudia and Pasta. Will you close us off?
Yeah, so just real quick, again, thank you for coming out and speaking to us today. I just wanted to ask, so how will you advocate for student workers in your role as in your role on the board? Thank you.
For me, I would say having been a student worker for the past 2 years, I've understood that most of the things that student workers face have to do with like the amount of time and commitment that they do have to do within their work roles, and understanding that sometimes these enterprises also do not take consideration that we are students first before being a worker, and also also understanding that the minimum wage, the standard rate for organizations on campus is usually included, is usually between like $14 to $15. And so meaning that students who are working with work study regardless or without work study, you have to increase the amount of hours you're able to work for you to be able to like gain some sort of like income within a certain period of time. So I think possibly advocating for like how those wages can be increased to ensure that the amount of time that students have to put into working can be balanced just as much with the time that they have to put into their studies as well. Not having the not having feel not having to feel obligated to work just as many hours, because those funds go towards things like books. For me, for example, I use those funds for like books, transportation, and other stuff on campus, partly tuition as well. So it is very important that when I consider like, oh, if I have to study or if I have to go to work, I'm just like, if I can't work, then how am I gonna like pay for what I'm gonna study about? So I think maximizing those hourly wage rates to ensure that the amount of time students have to spend working would be cut down a bit. I think that would be really beneficial to the student needs.
Amazing. Thank you, Rudia. Great. Can I get an, I believe it's ARC recommendation, or do we have a discussion now? Josh, sorry.
Oh, I can help jump on for that.
Sorry. Oh yeah, go ahead, Patty, please.
Yeah, usually we'll have 1 minute closing, and then in the discussion, we'll start that with ARC recommendation.
Awesome. Okay, Rudia, you are free to close off.
I just want to say thank you so much for providing me the opportunity to be in this space with you all. I really appreciate all the questions that you asked, and they have enabled me to like reason more into like what I can bring into the role. And I do hope when given the opportunity to, if given the opportunity to be able to like work with you all in centering student needs on campus, especially within like a hierarchical structure like ASUCLA. And yeah, I would just want to say thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thank you, Rudia. Okay, can I go into ARC recommendations?
Yeah, so 23200 ARC gives a positive recommendation for Wudia.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to move into deliberations. It's either a discussion or just like any praise you have for Rudia. I know I personally admire Rudia a lot. I got to work with her in Academic Senate last year and, saw how tenacious she really is and how much she really, cares for students in general. And yeah, like working with her as a senator has been nothing but a blessing. Really appreciate her in that space, and I'm just really excited to see what she will do in BOD, because definitely we need strong student voices in that space and students that can ensure transparency. And Budia is someone that I'm sure will be able to do both. So, anyone else has any comments? We'll do like a couple of minutes for that.
I just wanted to share that I really, okay, sorry. I just wanted to share that I really admire like all your specific like plans for BOD, and like especially with transparency. I definitely agree, and I definitely have like so much hopes for you. I'm not sure if I can say that right now, but like yeah, I just really admire like all of your responses in regards to transparency, especially with like the transition like back to fall, as like so many students are probably going to struggle with like finding resources. And so with BOD, it's such an important role to make sure that these resources are available.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to co-sign it. I don't want to take up too much time, but Lydia, you are a fierce student leader. I was impressed by you during the ARC interview, and I'm impressed by you now. I am so excited to see the work that you will do, or if you are voted in, that you will do in BOD. And I'm just really excited by all your plans.
Erman and Sarah.
Thanks, Breeze. Thank you so much for your time, Woody. I really appreciate it. Having also worked with you in Senate in this past year, as well as being very impressed by your ARC interview, as well as this interview. I think that you would do really, really great in this position. And I also really appreciate the specific comments you made about transparency and accessibility. And I do look forward to hopefully working with you to ensure that transfer students and other non-traditional students have their voices heard by the Board of Directors next year. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll close off with you, Sarah.
Thanks, Breeze. Also want to echo what everyone else has said. I've worked with Wudia in the Office of the President and have been taking this leadership class with her in the past 2 quarters. It's so evident that she's a phenomenal student leader, Wudia. You're going to do an incredible job, and if voted in. And I really appreciate all the time that you took to speak with the current students on the board and all the research that you did into this position.
Amazing. Love the love for Wudia, because I know I have a lot of love for her. So great. Can we do would someone like to make a motion to approve Wudia?
I move to approve Wudia for the ASUCLA BOD appointment.
It's just, it's actually a motion to appoint. Yep, no worries.
I move to appoint Wudia for the ASUCLA BOD appointment.
I second. Who was that? Sorry. Okay, Maya. Jane motions, Maya seconds. All in favor, please raise your hand. Amazing. By a vote of 14-0, or did someone's hands just go down? I'm not sure whose hand went down. Okay, 14-0. Wudia is approved to be our ASUCLA Board of Director appointment. Congratulations, Wudia. We're really excited for you.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to working with you all in the next year.
Amazing. Thank you, Wudia. And you're free to leave if you want to leave. You know, it's finals week, so thank you for coming this late. Great. Okay, awesome. We will be moving on to Megan. Megan is a first year right now, who is a pre-business econ major. She is currently involved in Samahang Filipino, and she was previously a part of USAC. She did the IBP internship last year. And, you know, I was just really impressed by her commitment to community, and ultimately, you know, think that as a first year, she is going to be the alternate, because I think that, you know, we want to allow her the room to grow from other student leaders who have taken on this position. But, you know, I'm really excited to see what she will do in the position. And yeah, thank you for joining us this late, Megan. I know it is really late, it's finals week, but we really appreciate you being here. So with that, if you can go ahead and give a quick 1-minute intro. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to interview for this. My name is Megan Verhelder-Dios. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a first year majoring in pre-business economics, and I'm hoping to serve on the ASUCLA Board of Directors for the next 2 years. I was initially interested in this position because of my passion and willingness to give back and serve the communities that I hold close to my heart. So from this past year, I served as the financial coordinator for the Filipino Recruitment and Enrichment Program, and then I interned from the board of Samahang Filipino, which is part of the Mother Organization Coalition, and I was a staff member for the USAC Internal Vice President Office. And during this, despite this entire year being virtual, I was able to find a place in these spaces, and with this position, I intend to continue to uplift and advocate for these welcoming communities, while also growing as a professional and as a leader. I understand the weight of representing an entire undergraduate student body and how my voice will be able to help shape students' lives at UCLA. And not only will I be able to uplift the needs of these underrepresented communities, but I will also be a second year who has not had an in-person college experience yet. And thinking about the transition back to being on campus, I believe that my voice and my opinion will help smooth the process and provide a unique perspective about the transition. And my goal for this position is to just provide greater transparency for the needs of first and second traditional and transfer students, while also advocating for the diverse spaces on campus. And again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to hopefully serve on this board, and thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Megan. So with that, the 15-minute question period begins. Erman?
Hi, Megan. Good to see you again. I am going to be consistent with my questioning. I would love to hear if you have any specific plans to support the accessibility of the board of directors to transfers and non-traditional students who have been historically kept out of that space.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think it's also something important that Lydia touched on, but obviously offering transparency and accessibility to all of these resources to continue to uplift the transfer community is going to be important. And the first step, I believe, is hearing them out and hearing what the transfer community has to say. During my time in the IVP office, I listened to a presentation where one of the platforms talked about providing education and resources on how to include the transfer community, such as using inclusive language. And I think that resources like that and opportunities for that to the entire student body is something that I will advocate for and something that I want to use my position to continue to be able to do for the transfer community. And just taking that first step to educate the student body on how to be inclusive and how to provide these resources to the transfer community is going to be my steps.
Thank you, Megan.
Any other questions? Great. I saw Emily and Cass's hands go up at the same time, so whichever one of you wants to go first. Okay, I think Emily, that was signing it off to you, Cass. So Cass, you can go ahead and go first.
Okay, my question is, how do you plan on making academic materials, the bookstore and like restaurants and the other like resources that ASUCLA provides more accessible for students as we transition back to campus?
I think first of all, having that presence of being able to communicate with the USAC and communicating the needs of the students is going to be important. As someone who hasn't been able to be on campus yet and know about where I can find these resources, just first of all, communicating and keeping that close contact is going to be important, especially because I don't exactly know yet how to get them, and just reaching out and learning and constantly educating myself on how I can speak to get these resources available to everyone is going to be important. And just continuing to communicate with the other student leaders who are part of USAC and being able to learn about how I can give these resources to the students is going to be my steps.
Amazing. Emily?
Hello, Megan. Thank you for being here so late at night. So I was just wondering, how do you plan to address and help student workers as ASUCLA mostly employs student workers?
I think continuing, like similar to the transfer community, I want to be able to listen to them first and be able to listen to what their needs are and what they have to say about this, and then providing the resources to help them. Also closely working with IVP. I know that the internal vice president office this past year has had a student worker platform, and I want to be able to learn more about what resources they can provide so that I can easily transfer keep that transparency and keep that communication with ASUCLA and USAC in order to ensure that student workers' voices are being heard and that their stories are being heard, so that I know what resources I can provide for them and what I can ask for them.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, if there are no more questions, we can move into closing statement.
Okay, Okay, I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to hopefully serve on this board. I want to just emphasize my willingness to serve and give back to the student body and my eagerness to grow as a professional and as a student leader as I also get to know each of you guys. And I intend to hold myself accountable for this position by hearing and understanding the needs of the student body. So just again, thank you for promptly considering me for this position and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Megan. With that, we will be moving straight into ARC.
With the 0 to 3 to 0, there is no recommendation because we would like to hear more about specific plans during like this interview that we just had.
Okay, so now we can open up the floor for discussion. And hearing as there were no recommendations from ARC's end, I think one thing that we might want to know is like, were those questions answered? Were enough questions asked during the period that like could suffice and people would feel comfortable making this recommendation? So the floor is open.
Sorry. I can go. I definitely feel a lot more comfortable with moving forward with appointing Megan after the council interview. And I also really admire her commitment to community and also her commitment to growing as a leader. I'm really excited to see, if voted in, the work that she'll do and how she'll grow on BOD. And that's just my thoughts at the moment.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I feel similar to Tay. I appreciate the answers that were given today. I think that overall, one of the things that I think a lot about is, how transfer students who are not like, materially given these positions can be, a part of those spaces and the decision-making processes. And those weren't necessarily any specifics that I heard about today. But I think something that I look forward to seeing and that I think Megan does definitely exhibit a desire to do is to really listen to those transfer voices and ensure that, they are centered and present when they need to be when it comes to these decisions. And so that's something that I hopefully look forward to, holding our appointments accountable to in this next year and also working closely with them to achieve those goals.
Thank you, Arman. Cass and Sarah?
Yeah, so similar to Arman and Tay, I do feel comfortable moving forward with Megan being board of directors because after the questions asked during council, I definitely feel like she is willing to learn about the position and actually put in that effort to, give back to the community and just like really like standing with different communities, including transfer students.
Great. Sarah?
Yeah, I'll keep this short. Same thing here. Really saw potential for growth here, and I was lucky to work with Megan, having her as an intern on my committee in the IPP office last year, and she showed great organizational abilities and a strong understanding of logistics, finance, all that good stuff. So I do feel comfortable going forward with her as an appointment to the board of directors.
Great. Any other comments, questions, concerns? If not, oh, Emily?
Hello, I was just going to say I feel comfortable moving forward with Megan. As others have stated, Megan seems very committed to learning and growing in the role, especially as the alternate. And additionally, as a rising second year who will be coming into UCLA without having been on campus, I think you would provide a good perspective to ASUCLA as to how best to serve a large community of students that will be arriving on campus for the first time.
Amazing. Great. If there are no other questions, comments, concerns, can I get a motion? And actually, Patty, I did have a question. Since she is my alternate, does that have to be stated clearly in this motion?
Yes, please include it in the motion so we have it for the record.
Okay, great. So I think it would go something like I move to appoint Megan to the ASUCLA Board of Directors as an alternate. So if anyone can make that motion.
I move to appoint Megan as the ASUCLA Board of Directors alternate.
A second?
A second.
Cass motion, Sarah seconds. All in favor, please raise your hand. Prom, sorry. Oh, okay, thank you. Awesome. By a 14-0 vote, the motion passes, and Megan, you are appointed to the ASUCLA Board of Directors as our alternate. Congratulations.
Thank you again for this opportunity.
Of course, we're really excited to see what you will do and all the growth that you have left to do. Really excited about that. Thank you so much. Great. Yay, guys, we made our first appointments. Okay, so I think we have no office reports, new business. So with that, we can adjourn the meeting. We will be adjourning this meeting at 9:36 p.m. Yay.
The recording has stopped.
Awesome. I know that this isn't usually, like we wouldn't have